Welcome to the digital version of Tiny Talks, where we speak to interesting people and open up a discussion for the topics that they've discussed. Hi, it's Hayden again, and you're listening into our online Tiny Talker series. We do this every Wednesday at noon, and we talk to really interesting people and hear their stories. This Wednesday, we have a ethnomusicologist on board with us, and an instructor at Juilliard. So this is going to be a really good one for those of you who are musically inclined, but also just just in general. And so it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Fredara Hadley to Tiny Talks.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So first and foremost, the one thing that you're going to have to explain to everybody is what
What is
exactly.
ethnomusicology?
Yeah, exactly.
Ethnomusicology is a big word with lots of syllables. It just means that I'm really interested in the musical aspects of culture, music as culture, how we can understand culture better by studying music, how music reveals our culture. Those are the kinds of questions that ethnomusicologists are really interested in.
So it always will then beg the next question is how does one get interested in ethnomusicology? So it's I'll speak for myself. I don't know that I ever saw that on a list of careers when I was looking at things that I wanted to do with my life. How did you end up doing that?
I didn't see it either, and it might have saved me a lot of time if I had. But thankfully, the field has been around over 60 years, and so you can actually major in ethnomusicology at some schools and institutions, or at least take courses in ethnomusicology. I didn't know that when I was an undergrad, and it wasn't until I was working on a master's degree in African American Studies that one of my professors from undergrad, I went to Florida A&M University for undergrad. I was talking to him about what I was interested in, what I was writing my master's thesis on, and he was like, you really ought to think about ethnomusicology as a field for you. And that was the first time I ever heard the word. Shout out to Dr. Darrell Williams. And I Googled, and I think I Googled. Was Google way back then? Anyway, I looked it up.
You're dating yourself for there. Come
Right, I
on.
know. I looked it up and I was like, oh my God, this sounds like, something that was tailor made for me. And yeah, that was the beginning of that was back in 2000 2006. And that was the beginning of my entrance and affiliation into this field. So now I've been an ethnomusicologist for about 14 years, including graduate school. So I guess I should finish the story. After that, I went on to earn a master's degree and then a PhD degree in ethnomusicology so that I could teach and do research.
Awesome. Awesome. I happen to know you, and pardon my assumption, but you identify as a black woman, correct?
Yes, I do.
Okay. How does that drive your desire? And you said research and writing. How does that drive, and how does that influence what you research, what you write about?
Oh, that's such a great question. Is at the very core of both my research, my training, and my pedagogy. Is at the very, very center. And it's how I actually came into the field. And so when Dr. Williams, who I just mentioned, told me about ethnomusicology, he told me the woman who I needed to study with was a woman named Dr. Portia Mosby. And she is a black woman, also from Florida. And she became my major professor and advisor and mentor in graduate school. And so from my very first encounter with ethnomusicology, it was with another black woman. From her perspective, someone who's very grounded in both advocating for women and for black people. And so I've never known ethnomusicology any other way than that. And, I'll be forever grateful for how she trained me. But then, even in how I do research, it's always really important to me to make sure that I use the books, the articles, the writings, the contributions that black women have already put into the world. There's a hashtag that's really popular on Twitter and social media that says cite black women. And so I'm always very cognizant to include the scholarship and work of other Black women as much as I can. I collaborate most often with other Black women ethnomusicologists and other Black women in general, and a lot of the work that I do. And my current research project is on a Black woman by the name of Shirley Graham Du Bois. And in studying her, I've learned about a pantheon of Black women that are also equally important. And so it anchors everything that I do as a scholar, as a researcher, as a writer, as a thinker. My identity as a Black woman.
And just for clarity's sake, being an ethnomusicologist doesn't mean that you focus only on black music, correct?
No, absolutely not. You have ethnomusicologists who study all kinds of things. One example that I often give is people may or may not be familiar with what's happening in China with a region of ethnic minorities known as the Uyghurs, right, and being forced into these assimilation camps and in China. And I had never heard of that population before I went to graduate school, and I had a classmate who was studying music of the Uyghurs, right? And so you have ethnomusicologists who carve up all kinds of people groups around the world, around this country, and study the music of those cultures. I am just one who focuses on African American and increasingly African and African diasporic music, but you have people who work in Finland, or you have people who are interested in queer
Oh.
ethnomusicology, or womanist ethnomusicology. All these different threads of ethnomusicology based on any number of identities that we have as people, or cultural affiliations or nationalities.
So there would be some that would purport that black music is going through somewhat of a renaissance in the current modern day. How do you see it? Do you see the influence growing? Do you see there being a movement to include it in other forms of music? Like how do you see black music and its status right now?
Good question. I always say the American popular music is Black music. That's what that is. And so Black music is always the sauce. It is always
Yes.
the thing that is driving certainly American pop music culture, but often global music culture as well, whether you're talking about not just sort of Black American, but the popularity of various African popular musics that get categorized as Afro beats, whether you're talking about calypso, right? All of these genres, South African house music, like all these genres are really powering what we hear in American pop music and global pop music. What I am always concerned with is that actual Black musicians and artists are being compensated fairly and given the opportunities at the upper most echelons of these sort of cultural industries. And they're being rightly compensated for the contributions that they make. So when we say things like there's a bit of a renaissance, I feel what is usually happening is that more Black artists are being acknowledged for the work that is always happening, and being rightly credited for the creativity that always exists. And so I think we're in a moment right now where we're seeing, thankfully, more of that. And my hope is always that it goes beyond being a moment into something that's far more sustainable.
Yeah, and if you look at any aspect of the music business, a lot of it is just plain grimy. And
Yeah.
so, there are stories in perpetuity about people who got, swindled out of their money, out of their music
Yep.
rights from all different types of identities. Whether it's straight white men or a queer woman of color. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that there is a disproportionate amount of people of color who got their stuff taken away from them. And so, as in your role as an ethnomusicologist or an instructor at Juilliard, congratulations, one of Juilliard's newest instructors.
Thank you.
How do you see your day to day as part of that process? Like, what does your day look like in terms of making sure that credit is given where credit is due?
That's another good question. A lot of colleges, universities are at this interesting inflection point. There's a lot of generational shifts that's happening in colleges. Um, our boomers retire, and then the next generation sort of moves in. And one of the things that is exciting about being at Juilliard at this particular point in time is that my hire represents an expansion and including ethnomusicology. That's new for Juilliard. And so it's been exciting to be in a position to introduce ethnomusicology as a discipline to both colleagues and students who may not have been familiar with it before. And I was telling to someone recently, when you become a professor and you do a PhD and all of that, you get really invested in your little piece of the pie. I said that I'm working on this project about Shirley Graham Du Bois, and that's my little area and all of that. But when you're in a situation like the one in which I find myself at Juilliard, you really have to come back to the fundamentals of what is important about ethnomusicology in general, like the basics,
Right,
an
right.
ethnomusicology 101 kind of class. And it's been actually really nice to return to the basics after having traveled so deeply into the esoteric, for instance. And so at Juilliard, that's one half of what I get to do. I get to just rethink and revisit these ideas about what ethnomusicology is, why I think it's important, why I think it's important to musicians and artists,
Hmm.
which make up the Juilliard student population. But also, I get to teach a little bit of my research area in dealing with African American music and introduce that and support initiatives that pre-exist. My joining Juilliard, just adding my little expertise to what they're doing, and so that's really exciting too. And finding that this knowledge that I've spent all these years accruing does have value in that environment. And I would say one of the most exciting things I've gotten to do in my short tenure there thus far is to curate the Black History Month exhibit, which was entitled Claiming Your Space, honoring the artistry, history, and humanity of Black Juilliard students. And, that was such a great way for me, a Juilliard newbie, to really kind of learn Juilliard history, institutional history, learn who some of these pioneering African American artists were, who they were, who came through the Juilliard School, and to be able to offer that up as a really important portal into Juilliard's legacy to current faculty and staff and students. So that was super exciting and an incredible opportunity that I got to collaborate with the libraries and the archivists there at Juilliard.
So now that you're done with that particular project for Black History Month, what next project are you that can you share with us about?
So that's a great question. The next, so much is up in the air right now, but what I'm really trying to do in this particular moment of social distancing is to get a jump start on my Shirley Graham Du Bois project, which I'm really excited about. I've been working on this for 2 years, and just in terms of context, she was the first African American to compose and stage an opera in American history, but she was also a revolutionary. She was a playwright. She was a nation builder. She was an author. She was a biographer. She was just a firebrand of a woman. And then also she was married to W.E.B. Du Bois. And I've been traveling. She was also a communist, and so she and WB kind of got hounded out of the United States, and they found asylum. They were offered asylum in the young nation of Ghana in West Africa by Kwame Nkrumah. And so I've always really been interested in the relationships between Africa, the Caribbean, and the U.S., Black people in the U.S. And so there's a way to talk about that musically, culturally, and a lot of that is wrapped up in her life. And I've been back and forth to Ghana, I think 4 times thus far, working on this project. So I'm trying to use this time now to get a jump start on some of the reading research I need to do in order to write the book
Right, right.
about her and her ongoing love affair and relationship with the continent of Africa and the diaspora. So I'm really excited about that, and that's what I'm working on.
So Juilliard is a very old institution. And
Yes.
the minute you say an old institution, certain identities, you know, come to the fore. How
Mhm.
have you seen opportunities or challenges that arose because of the identities that you bring to the table?
So, and one of the things I knew about Juilliard before I joined there, but it was affirmed when I started doing research for the exhibit, it is an older institution, but there is a long history of African American students or African Americans going to Juilliard. And so that was inspiring to me as someone who is new in my department of music history. At the moment, I'm the sole African American in my department. But in academia, that if you're not at an HBCU, that's not strange or rare at all. But there are also a lot of people who were I didn't expect people to be excited about I didn't expect them to be hostile at all, of course, but I didn't expect people to be excited about both. I think the diversity that I represent as a human, like the packaging of my humanity, but also my knowledge base. And I have found, um, and this isn't always the case in life, but I've found a delightfully surprisingly high level of support across departments for who I am and what I'm interested in and what I think I can contribute. And that's been, one of the best things about being there. And what I often say sometimes, like, people like, oh, you teach at Juilliard, that's amazing. And it is, I get that. But the most amazing part about it to me is that I still get to bring my whole self into the building every day. And if that means, sometimes a lot of days I have on a wax print dress, colorful wax print dress from that was made in Ghana, and I have short hair and tattoos and all that, and I don't feel any way about it. I can teach my classes in the ways that feel most authentic to me, both in terms of delivery of material and the material that I teach. And that just isn't always the case in higher education. And I do not take it for granted that that's been my reality at both institutions at which I've taught. I'm immensely grateful for that and for the support of people who decide to be mentors within these institutions, help me kind of get acclimated and all of that, because that just isn't always the case. If you look on the internet, it's full of horror stories of Black women, especially, but and there's research on this, how toxic higher education can be for people who aren't cis heterosexual white men,
Yeah.
right? And so I am very, very grateful to my colleagues that I've gotten a chance to work with. I taught at Oberlin College and Conservatory before this, and I have a lot of grace with friends and a lot of empathy for colleagues and friends for whom that isn't their reality, and I stand in solidarity with them. And because I have that freedom, I try to inspire that same autonomy and freedom and confidence in every student that I have, particularly the non men and the non white students, because I want them to have the same opportunities in their careers.
That's awesome. Well, you know what? You have definitely inspired whoever's listened to this interview. I hope a lot of our students take the time to listen to it because it's very important information, and we know that you are very busy. And I thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to talk with us today at Tiny Talks.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Now, this was an absolute pleasure. And again, this is Tiny Talks. We do this every Wednesday, and we will have another interesting guest next week. This is the Multicultural Center's online programming. I am your host and director of the Multicultural Center, Hayden Green. And again, we've been chatting with Dr. Fredara Hadley. Thank you so much, and we will see all of you next week.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.